Shalom Aleichem, Erev Tov. It's been a while since I made these videos because I've been enjoying reality way too much, way more than fantasy and delusion, which the internet is a breeding ground for such abstractions that cannot make it in the real world to exist. If you quantify existence by pixels on a screen and audio waves from an external speaker or internal speaker. Anyway, so more observations, I suppose I can start there. I have been job hunting, and curiously enough, I've been getting rejected a lot, and my deductive reasoning is my lack of employment experience. I've been on disability for the last 18 years now, very few jobs. I'm enrolled in 3 government agencies that are dedicated to getting people that are disabled into employment, and all 3 are failing. They are shit, absolutely shit. It's rather annoying, but nonetheless, I get out there every day and job hunting. Getting out is giving me these insights, observational insights, I should say, into, well, the harms of cannabis legalization, but also a comparative variance between myself and others with similar diagnoses. And for context, I'm currently reading the DSM-5. And not only am I reading the DSM-5, but I still have my whiteboard notes. And when it comes to forensic evaluation and assessments of a suspect in a criminal case to determine competence, if they're mentally competent to stand trial or not, well, having a pre-existing diagnosis does not guarantee the insanity defense. And one of the mitigating factors in that is functional abilities. If someone has a pre-existing diagnosis of bipolar type 1 or type 2, manic, mania, depression, etc., but they've held a job and got a 4.0 GPA in school and things like that, well, their functional abilities interfere with symptom expression, and therefore their functional abilities and components, functional capacities, according to Gristle. Grisso's functional component means that their intelligence mitigates the schizophrenia defense or the bipolar defense or the depressive disorder defense and things like that. Does symptom expression interfere with functional abilities? Yeah. So in that lens of analysis, one job I applied to was a neurorehabilitative facility of adults, mostly young adults, with brain injuries. I would have been perfect for that job, but they do have clients that get violent. I have experience working with violent clients, but that was prior to losing my left hand. There are laws in place to protect both client and employee from injury. So if a client flips out and attacks me, I can defend myself in a very specific way. They train you for this. Back in 1999 and 2000, it was called the MANT system, M-A-N-D-T. And you need 2 hands. One grabs the wrist of each client's wrist. Right hand grabs the left wrist. Left hand grabs the right wrist from behind, and you hug them so they are restrained. It's like a straitjacket, essentially. And you do that until you get help, and then they're a team restraint after that. I can't do that. Now, one of the clients there, he did have a brain injury. I'm not going to specify his name or anything. He was black, And he was the violent client they were worried about hiring me because he's had incidents in the past, a history of incidents with staff. But I found myself comparing myself to this man because he had jumped off a bridge and got a brain injury because of cannabis use causing his schizophrenia and suicidality. And he is in a facility for the rest of his life because his family can't afford care or to house him, or he's a danger to himself and others, and they can't afford round-the-clock care and things like that. I electrocuted myself in cannabis-induced psychosis, identical circumstances. Yet I am not only not in a facility for the rest of my life, but I got my bachelor's degree in psychology and am job hunting with a cumulative 4.0 GPA. So a big factor in that is being anti-marijuana and saying no to marijuana, of course, and applying the other neuropsych, things like Dr. Albert Ellis, identifying environmental stimulus that acts as contributing factors to maladaptive thoughts and behavior, which, of course, cannabis, including involuntary exposure to secondhand cannabis, forced drugging was a huge cause. So even though Africans may have a genetic advantage in terms of physiognomy, biology, things like that, better digestive systems, etc., apparently intelligence gives me the advantage over that person because I'm out and he's in. But nonetheless, after that, I was catching the bus home, and the marijuana impact on society, increasing homelessness and mental illness and things like that. I saw white police officers talking to a black man who appeared to be in psychosis. He was, very, very animated, rapid movements, very angry, word salad, shouting at the bus stop where the tweaker Tony guy, the guy who stinks like marijuana and is missing his top and bottom teeth from smoking methamphetamine and is constantly doing the meth mouth on the bus. Yeah, he lives at that bus stop. His tent was there for a while with the Air Force guy and stuff. Well, that same bus stop is where this black guy was at, and we're thinking, are they letting these guys smoke weed because it's legal in Virginia, and the liberals and the conservatives, you're owned by the Zionists? You're like, I don't know the actual explanation, but for whatever fucked up and retarded reason, they're letting these people smoke marijuana, even though it's causing them to go homelessness and other psychotic symptom expression, which homelessness is a psychosis symptom expression, typically. Yeah. And the answer was yes. So in catching the bus, there was another person that stank like marijuana, and it was a transgender. And I did really good at emotional detachment and objectivity. Just kept reading my book. I was having a conversation with the bus driver about applying for the sheriff's, and this thing decided to just force itself into my conversation uninvited. There's a lot of data and statistics that say the police have a bias and, systematic bias. And the conservative bus driver coddled the transgender. Oh, the bias is real. What happened to Back to Blue? Because Christian conservatives are just, pussies, basically. They're just coddling and enabling. And so I was like, okay, there's marijuana turning this white person into this mentally ill homosexual who thinks it's a woman. I'm just going to read my book, put my earphones in, whatever. I did that. But in one of the jobs that I applied to, they asked us for a criminal history. And I have 2 misdemeanors from over 17 years ago. My understanding is in the state of Virginia, if it was more than 7 years ago, you don't have to, disclose your misdemeanors. But they put in, don't count things like possession of marijuana. I thought that's so insanely fucked up. What an insult, because marijuana caused the psychosis that caused my misdemeanors. And it's causing the mental illness these people are grifting off of. Sorry, I forgot my Twitter is yet again banned. keep count to how many Twitters that's happened to. So I no longer have to limit these for under 10 minutes. So in that job interview, which is one of 3 or 4 that I've had in the last 2 weeks, I'm doing pretty good. They asked me to say why diversity is so important. And I did not expect that question. The other 2 companies did not ask me that, but this one did, which I thought was odd. And I don't know if my answer was satisfactory, because I don't think diversity is important at all. I think it's just a globalist agenda that's being forced on the poor by these weird, evil mega corporations who really have no moral high ground. They just have all the money. And my 2 misdemeanors caused by cannabis-induced psychosis is a perfect example of that. So here's the example. Wealthy and powerful people, which a lot of are Jews, but there's a lot of non-Jews, but Jews like Lou Adler, Leo Cohen, Jerry Heller, people like that who control the media. They, well, not control the media, have a strong influence in the media. They do a lot of cannabis product placement. And the cannabis propaganda increase cannabis use, which is increasing mental illness and homelessness. There's stock in antipsychotic medication that is booming because of cannabis legalization. So it's a gold mine for the psychology industry, the crime profit industry, because it's increasing crime. So police are getting more money because cannabis is causing more crime. Unless some weirdo senators say, oh, well, it's not a crime if it's not illegal. So let's just legalize theft under $500 in California. Poof, stealing is okay. What an insanely corrupt world and government I live in right now. Anyway, oh yeah, that also reminds me. And this might seem like disorganized speech, but it's not derailing. I'll stick to the point. But I went into a library and found a book that I want to read. And it was a Cool Conduct or something like that. And it was about the Weimar period. Really good stuff. And staying moral in the Weimar Republic. When you're surrounded by immorality, just like we world with all the disgusting things going on consequent of cannabis legalization. Like the homelessness, the mental illness, the harder drug use, suicides, homicides, vehicular fatalities, child rapes, marijuana-facilitated sexual assaults, etc. But I digress. So, cannabis caused my schizophrenia, in which I electrocuted myself, and that's my 1 misdemeanor. I thought it was insanely messed up that the rich, white, and Jewish people of Orcas Island insisted that I get charged criminally for being schizophrenic and electrocuting myself in cannabis-induced psychosis because they were without electricity for a little bit. But the FBI did what the rich commanded them, because they're just thugs for the rich, so prosecute law enforcement or something, I guess. Anyway. And because that, despite that being such an obvious sign of cannabis-caused mental illness, the corrupt white and Ashkenazi society of the Puget Sound suppressed the fact that they knew, like, I had mental illness and that marijuana was causing it, which led to the second crime. Attempted luring. I hit on a minor, allegedly, I should say, because I'm not even sure if I did it or not. This was when I was on federal probation from the first misdemeanor, which they pled down to destruction of government property. And that technically was a violation of the federal probation, and they were supposed to violate me, but my FBI probation officer said, we're not going to violate you on this because, well, why did it take them over a year to file charges? This happened in 2009. They filed charges in 2010. Obviously, you're not the most dangerous guy. If this happened, they waited a year to file charges. They filed charges when a year of my 12-month sobriety thing, when I quit doing drugs and alcohol because I realized it caused this. So that was also a misdemeanor, and I think AI is the one that is running the background checks and determining if I get hired or not for a lot of these companies. And artificial intelligence really fucks it up a lot. I think it's just creating a virtual experience for me and filling in blanks that it can't find the actual, data for, because it's not a real life person, so it can't get out of the computer and go to some library or, government file storage center and go through files that are on ink and paper and not on the internet. And even if it's on the internet, its search seems really limited. I've had Ancestry.com suggest my aunt Deborah, but it gave me the wrong birth date and the wrong the location of birth and last name and everything, and same thing with my mother. So I think it's just taking pieces of their identities and then just filling in the rest. And she confirmed that as well. White Pages did that with my mom and said, oh, this is your mom, definitely 100%, same first, last name, etc. It wasn't my mom. I know it wasn't my mom because I know my mom's information. And so I think, had I just kept my mouth shut and not posted all this stuff on the internet, then I pissed off these Jews, like these Ashkenazi Jews who have a network of power and influence in the Puget Sound. And the source for that conclusion is based on, the fact that I ended up looking up a lot of these people later on, once my brain injury started to decrease with my brain exercises and my mental illness started to decrease, when my functional capacity and ability began to overcome symptom expression. And a lot of these people were Jewish. Levi Polkinen, the name Levi, of the tribe of Levi, he turned out to be Ashkenazi. He wrote an article for me for the Seattle Times, depicting me as the worst monster on the planet. And he wasn't the only one. There was a lot of Jews that in my brain injured, phase, and prior to that, I just thought they were rich white people. I didn't know they were actually not white. They were Jewish. They were white Jews, Ashkenazi. People like that. So they monitor me through the internet, through social media. And you may seem like nobody's watching, and they're probably the ones who get me banned all the time from all the mainstream sites like Facebook and Twitter, etc. But this is really fucked up, because they're also the ones pushing marijuana and pornography, and that's eugenics. So they're committing a eugenicide against my people, like Native Americans and stuff like that. Native Americans are now 1.1% of the United States population that aren't race mixed. That's declined from 2.9% over the last 10 years. Drugs and porn have a lot to do with that particular demographic decline to extinction, practically. They're going extinct. And so the same people committing a genocide on me and my people, right? This evil, fucked up government who weaponizes every website it can, Gab, BitChute, YouTube, you name it. They're punishing me for speaking out against the genocide, the eugenocide they're committing against me. Right? So the people with money control the law, control society. Money shapes democracy. Democracy, yeah. That's a really profound observation in itself. And so had I just kept my mouth shut and not posted all these videos on the internet, which didn't stop anything anyway. They have social engineer manipulation. They control what gets boosted, what gets suppressed. It's not like I was even making a fucking blip of difference in any of it. I'm just observing the facts, right? Just analyzing and observing. But it's like that Voltaire quote, it's dangerous to be right when the government is wrong, I guess. But it's not really the government. It's the corporations and banks and real institutions of power that control the government like it's puppet. The government is the bitch of the banks, basically. And finance and things like that. Yeah. So, it's it's not just an insult, it's a slap in the face that these very same marijuana pushing, porn pushing, drug pushing, and immigration pushing people are punishing me for noticing what they're doing and posting about it, despite the fact that posting stops nothing. There's so many immigrants that I see on a daily basis, it's insane. And it's really funny because one is from Pakistan. We thought Mexicans are bad. Wait until you meet Pakistanis. I began to talk to the guy, and he said, "Oh well, America was founded because the Native Americans were basically black people, right? The original Americans were black people, and the government was made by white criminals. Like England sent its criminals to form the government, and they were the slave owners, and so they bought the slaves, and so like the government is white criminal slaves, and everybody and the Native Americans are the black slaves." It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And it was just so stupid. And I just ignored it. I just walked away from him mid-sentence. Like, dude, what? That's Weed World? You got Tweaking Tony, the white tweaker, and, you know, the weed-smoking tranny who's all... But I would only be hired if I managed to express a love for diversity, not the merits and qualities of my skills and capacity to perform in the role that I'm applying for. And I might not get hired because marijuana causing my psychosis caused 2 misdemeanors, but possession of marijuana charges are just like a joke and not even a real crime. What? So, I mean, I guess you could say they're white liberals that interviewed me. I'm pretty sure the dude was not Jewish. Like, he was white. And, that's just fucking nuts to me. That's so counter-sane. That is insane. That is contradictory to sanity. It's out of touch with reality. It's so brainwashed. And conservatives would say, well, this is the liberal leftist brainwashing, right? Pro-diversity, pro-marijuana, anti-truth. But no, conservatives are just as bad, if not worse, because you get conservatives and liberals in the same area, and they're all white. And they all have these weird mental gymnastics to support marijuana legalization, mass immigration, pornography legalization. At the White Christian Church, conservative, they were expressing a lot of Trump support. And I said, well, that's weird. He's more like King Herod than Jesus. Why isn't he recriminalizing pornography? Wouldn't that be the Christian thing to do? Oh, well, you know. And one of them said, well, don't you know who runs the world? And I said, Jesus? Because isn't that something Christians always say, that Jesus is in control and it's all part of God's plan and all that stuff? And he said, no, Satan. Satan runs the world? And I just said, how does that make any sense? And he couldn't answer. He's like, and then he tried to bullshit me with even more bullshit than the other bullshit, to where, like, God's plan and Jesus in control means Satan runs the world? That's so insanely fucking retarded. And the black people were the Native Americans and they were the slaves. And I tried to say, no, the English government, I think they did send penal colonies to Australia, but that's the other side of the ocean. Oceans! There's both the Pacific and the Atlantic are between us and Australia. I think it's in the Pacific, but if you go across the Atlantic and then on the other side of Africa, and this is marijuana legalization. This is like the IQ decline, the immigration increase, the LGBTQ increase, the homelessness. the harder drug use, the increase of methamphetamines and fentanyl and cocaine and fucking God knows what else. This was all by design. And if I don't go along with it, then I'm not hired, and the AI most likely will continue to cause me job rejections. And even though I'm doing really good, the people who run, who use smartphones to manipulate the masses, the CIA, the FBI, whoever it is, they're putting pornographic YouTube suggestions in my YouTube feed, even though I haven't looked at porn in a very long time. I'm pretty much on a really good, I think the longest streak since I first was involuntarily exposed to pornography as a kid through Hollywood. Which happens when I get DVDs from the library, and there's unexpected exposure to nudity and things like that. Because Hollywood's run by the same people that push cannabis in the same movies. And a lot of Jews, but a lot of whites and, non-Jews. So that's just profoundly curious to me, because here I am. I say no to drugs. I pay my rent. I got my degree. I'm putting out resumes and applications, trying to get a job. And I'm getting fucked. I'm getting rejected. But the diversity agenda, there's people who don't even speak English that are being coddled and hired and stuff with very low merits and qualities. And people like the Tony Tweaker and that Air Force guy and the other dude who they're getting their ass kissed like crazy and getting all this shit for free because they're doing the wrong thing. They're fucking doing drugs and fucking God knows what else. And so they're being rewarded. That behavior is being reinforced. My behavior is being punished. Is it because society is so corrupt that it punishes bright, good behavior and rewards unhealthy, bad behaviors? Well, yes. But it's also that I think the Epstein Island client list is a good way to describe it. The plutocracy, the oligarchy, the Illuminati, the Jews, the Bilderbergs, the 1%, whatever you want to call them. There's like a wealthy and powerful elite that raped a bunch of children on Epstein Island a few years ago now. And they're the ones pushing these agendas because they have all the wealth and power and, manipulate global finance and things like that. And they're responsible for these demographic shifts and culture shifts and trend shifts. And it's like a constant spam flood of propaganda on the smartphones. And I could see its real world influence. It's some pretty wild stuff. And I do believe there is a significant likelihood that if it wasn't for this influence, I would have already had, care and support after electrocuting myself for one, but I never would have electrocuted myself in the first place. But even now, I would have already had a job if it wasn't for this, socially engineered moral decline and corruption of the United States. Thank you for your time. And just in case I wasn't specific about this enough, I think that these CEOs who were both Jewish and non-Jewish control artificial intelligence, and so they are manipulating the masses through manipulating artificial intelligence. And there is a possibility they're programming, controlling the AI to determine my not getting hired. But it could also be my lack of employment history. Oh yeah, and another thing the JewTube is doing is just aggressively weaponizing a lot of really, really low IQ, lowbrow propaganda. And it's similar to what's happening on Gab. It's all weaponized by there's such an obvious human intervention in the algorithm and the data manipulation and things like that. It's impossible for anyone to ignore that has any intact faculties of observation and cognition. And with YouTube, a lot of it is feminist propaganda where they've got like women protagonists and women sword fighters and chess players and this weird anti-white propaganda, along with the pornographic stuff where this woman's playing with her pussy and things like that. Things I do not want to see, and my Google spies who spy on me know I don't want to see that shit, so they're doing it on purpose to, well, I don't know their motives exactly, but to fuck with me at the very least. And, so I've been checking out movies from the library. And one is titled Remember. And it's about this Holocaust survivor who's suffering dementia, and his wife dies, and he made a promise that he would be one of the Nazi hunters who, like, hunts down this guard block commander of his block. And it's quite hilarious. Like, it's such Jewy propaganda. It's so retarded. So much of it is stupid. They depict Hank from Breaking Bad as, like, the state police, and therefore the police are the Nazis, because they, like, enforce the law, so they're the Gestapo. It's so fucking gay and retarded. But at the end of it, turns out he was the Nazi he was hunting for all along, and him and his partner, his second in command, they tattooed Holocaust numbers on each other's arms because that was the only way they'd survive. And so the liberators, the Americans, assumed they were Jewish and rescued them. This is the movie plot. This isn't necessarily reality. And so a lot of German, Auschwitz guards pretended to be Jewish and therefore escaped, the wicked shit the Allies were doing to the Germans. Like, and I thought, so you're telling me that there's a lot of Jews out there that are actually the Nazis according to the Jews. Okay. It was really interesting because they actually did the first potential block commander fake identity guy. They did put in a section where he said, yes, Germany was all about nationalism. I was like any other good German. I was a soldier and I fought for my country. But I was in Africa. The Afrikaner Corps, in North Africa, not in Auschwitz, and blah, blah, blah. So that was really interesting. And the whole thing about the slap in the face from the liberals or whoever it is, these corporations that are, fucking up society so horribly for a lot of profit. Therefore, I have to express a love for diversity, and marijuana is okay, or I don't get hired. Even though marijuana caused me to fucking, it destroyed my life, essentially, because of the psychosis that it causes. It reminds me of Arabs that end up joining the American military, even though the American military has, murdered most of their entire family and village and etc. Yeah, they're just not giving a shit, not giving me a choice. That's insanely fucked up. And these sort of evil, psychopathic motherfuckers are the ones that run corporations and the government and society. And I think that explains a lot about the current state of affairs. And not just what you see on the internet. But what you see on the internet definitely counts. And just so my point is clear, just imagine the audacity of telling someone who suffered 3 self-inflicted amputations and third-degree burns over 40% of my body that, marijuana possession isn't really that serious. We don't care about those crimes. Maybe it's just liberals is the, label that applies here, but what a bunch of fucked up assholes. Just a quick vid before I head out. Some thoughts here. Recently I've been getting movies from the library, and it seems like all of Hollywood is low IQ goy slop propaganda, right? Is it goy slop or is it just kafir slop, which would be haram? But it got me thinking how many idiots fall for these lies through electronic media. And so, in comparing myself to the black schizophrenic man who is institutionalized for the rest of his life because he jumped off a bridge and caused himself self-inflicted a brain injury and cannabis-induced psychosis, there seems to be a hereditary IQ differential, and this differential is undoubtedly why I am outside and he is institutionalized. But this differential manifests in other ways, right? When I post truths about the harms of cannabis on the internet, the latest one, the black guy that murdered 8 kids in Shreveport, Louisiana, had a pretty significant history of cannabis use, so it's most likely yet another cannabis-induced mass shooting of children. So many school shootings were committed by people high on cannabis. Yet I'll post that to the internet, and in response, I will be banned, censored, suppressed, and I'll have aggressive liars just lie in the comment section on the videos and, websites where I don't get banned, which are also suppressed. And I keep thinking how, well, this low IQ black person probably believed these marijuana pushing liars on the internet, which led to his suicide attempt and brain injury and lifelong institutionalization. And I can't imagine how many suicides, just suicides alone, have been caused by liars who push, destructive cannabis propaganda and other lies on the internet. That is another symptom of the corruption of the United States, is that this is being allowed to happen. The government is interfering with it, so most likely the government is behind it or complicit. Yeah. I feel like that mass shooting of children caused by marijuana is a perfect example of how the liars on the internet lie. And the harms these lies cause, which include permanent, lifelong disability, injury, suicide, death, etc. So, a common response I will get when the cannabis-induced homicide or mass homicide is perpetrated by a black offender is that it's the genetics. It's because African genetics are low IQ and violent and blah, 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 blah. And, I'll simply point out all the white mass shooters of European ancestry who, smoked marijuana and then shot up a school, shot a bunch of kids, or just committed a mass homicide, mass murder, mass shooting in general. And they'll just shut down or they'll just keep lying. But I recently had one that actually got into a bit of an intellectually honest debate about it. He wasn't completely honest, but more than most. And so we got into epigenetics. And it was really funny because there is some science to the disproportionate, criminal offending behavior from Africans in comparison to whites, but at the same time, Asians have even lower rates of crime than whites. So does that mean whites are the blacks to the Asians? Or the Jews, for that matter, right? Where does the racial hierarchy end? I mean, anyway, so in that debate about epigenetics, I pointed out that the MAO1 inhibitor gene is, it's called the warrior gene. And it's really interesting because I don't get why the other extreme, the white libtards will claim that it's socioeconomic factors, but somehow blacks aren't responsible for their own socioeconomic factors, as in, creating them or improving their own circumstances. No, white people have to work even harder to give more free shit and
criminal leniency on the basis of race. That's fucking stupid. But when his argument was that, genetic differences are tangibly observable in differential responses to cannabis, right, with homicide rates, then I asked, why does weed turn blacks homicidal and whites gay? Like, is that what you're telling me here? The warrior gene isn't a white gene? And that was really funny, because then he just eventually stopped responding. He had no answer to that. It was really hilarious. And that's the thing about these liars on the internet. Their lies will literally, boo, it cures cancer. That was a recent one that I got, and it's a common one. So, if marijuana cures cancer, how did Bob Marley smoke marijuana his whole life and die of cancer? And while in that mode of thinking, I had a conversation with a Christian, and these are questions he just doesn't respond to. So I pointed out that because the Christians are chipping out about the 8 dead kids murdered in Shreveport, and I said, oh, well, he was a cannabis smoker, so obviously the marijuana caused the mass murder of 8 children. And I messaged my friend about this. And I said, well, if you're okay with weed legalization, then you're okay with the murder of these 8 kids, because if cannabis caused the homicidal psychosis that caused the murder of these 8 children, right? If he was under the influence of cannabis when he murdered those 8 kids, well, it could have been prevented. That's what laws are for, to prevent bad things from happening or do something about bad things when they happen. So had he been prevented from consuming cannabis, those 8 kids could still be alive. Obviously, as a Christian, he's okay with the 8 children being murdered because he's okay with marijuana legalization. But why doesn't Jesus give a shit? How does that make any fucking sense? And this is the same guy that I ask, how are trans kids part of Jesus' plan? He just can't reply. He has not responded to me in weeks because he just can't respond honestly. He has no answer. It's quite hilarious. But at the same time, in my attendance of Bible study with the boomer Protestants, they were trying to say that the Jews were God's chosen people because they have all that wealth. And I said, oh, well, they're having the biggest gay pride parade in the Middle East. Is that, God's chosen people behavior? Oh, well, oh my goodness, the mental gymnastics from the boomer Christians are so hilarious. Oh, well, the state of Israel is secular, and they just need Jesus. We're the real Israel, actually. They fell out of favor with God when they rejected Jesus. It's quite funny. Well, they're still God's chosen people because they have a lot of wealth. Oh, man. And so then I pointed out, right, I interjected a little reality into their fantasy, which they keep reinforcing my observation that Christians are more susceptible to psychological manipulation because most of their, beliefs are rooted in these fantasies and fiction, texts and scriptures, and just imagining, what the scriptures are communicating. So, yeah, really easy to manipulate with fictional characters. So the reality I interjected was based on an interview that I saw with a Sephardic Jew who his family had remained in the Middle East for thousands of years. He might have been a Yemeni Jew. And the interview showed him, he was talking about how the whites showed up, the white Jews from Poland and Russia and, Ukraine and things like that. And they fucked over a bunch of brown Jews in the Middle East the same way they fucked over the Arabs, like stole a bunch of land from them he said that at the state of Israel, and it's, beginning in 1948 on, there was multiple political parties. There was a communist party, there was a fascist party, there was Democrats, Republicans, all that stuff, but at the core they were all run by the Zionists. One political party was running 5 or 8 controlled opposition political parties, but at the core it was the same people, at the top. And so, when I pointed that out, there was quite a difference in response. It was so hilarious, to where one woman was saying, oh, well, the white Jews are still going to return to Israel from Ukraine and Russia and Poland. The prophecy brainwashing was quite hilarious. And then another guy was saying, oh, well, that God didn't found the state of Israel, man founded the state of Israel, so that's not God's country, that's man's country. Because I brought up the Balfour Declaration, and it was a Christian who believed that when the Jews returned to Israel, Jesus will return. And so in 1948, the Jews started returning to Israel, and Jesus still hasn't shown up. So it's quite hilarious. The psychological observations are pretty fun. But at the same time, my attitude inoculation to the media manipulation, it's really not just making movies ineffective, but social media in general. I mean, it's obviously just a weaponized propaganda machine that constantly floods my psyche whenever I engage with it, with propaganda, with political propaganda, because you got elections, either coming up or happening right now, and all this other garbage and nonsense. It's all just a simulated reality. It's not real. It's pixels on a screen. And it's social programming and social engineering. But the worst part is, there's no one in real life that I can go to and say, hey, these people are remotely causing suicides and shifting demographics and shifting trends and culture and, etc. Shifting legal policies, shifting drug overdose death rates, shifting rates of homelessness, mental illness, psychosis, homicides, mass homicides, vehicular fatalities, rapes of children, all caused by cannabis legalization and the associated policies like the, gay agenda and the immigration and all that stuff, porn. It's pretty wild stuff.